All right, so we are live on YouTube. We can give a few. Do you want to give like a couple more minutes for people to come in?
Yeah, maybe one or two.
Yeah. So someone asked me if this will be recorded, and I forgot to say, will it be recorded?
Yeah, so when it streams on YouTube, it'll be available on YouTube after.
Okay. Great.
Okay, thank you, Emily.
Hi, Kate.
For everyone who's just arriving, we're waiting just, I think, another minute or so. Thank you for coming. We'll begin shortly.
And I just want to say, if you hear someone crying, I'm not torturing anybody in this apartment. Just bedtime, and maybe my daughter's crying. So I don't know if you could hear that or not, but she'll stop soon. She's with her super dad.
Well, on that lovely note, I think we should start. Hello, everyone. Thank you all for joining us today. Before we officially begin, a brief introduction. Both the Yemen Relief and Reconstruction Foundation and Code Pink are hosting the series, which is a very exciting collaboration. My name is Arwa. I volunteer with Yemen Relief and Reconstruction Foundation. Yemen Relief and Reconstruction Foundation provides relief in Yemen and advocates in the US to end the war.
And I'm Danica. I'm a Yemen campaigner at Code Pink. Code Pink's been working in coalition with other organizations to stop US involvement in the war in Yemen for years, and we always love working with Yemen Relief and Reconstruction Foundation.
As many of you know, Yemen is experiencing the largest humanitarian crisis in the world. This is a crucial issue that needs to be addressed. However, Yemen has a rich history and culture that also deserves attention. The Beyond the War series aims to showcase Yemen outside the context of war and center Yemeni voices. We hope to break stereotypes and build solidarity with the Yemeni communities. To start off the series, we have Atiat El Wazir with us. She's among many things, a writer, the co-founder of Support Yemen, a co-author of Change Square, and a consultant with gender associations. For further information, please refer to her impressive bio. Fittingly, Storytelling as Resistance nicely doubles as our first event and an adept description of what the series is.
We will begin with a brief talk by Atiaf, and then we'll move to questions. You can ask questions throughout the event. For those of you who are joining us via Zoom, please try and use the Q&A section and leave the chat for comments. And with that, I will pass it over to Atiaf.
Thank you so much for that introduction. I'm really excited to be part of this. Yemen Cultural Series is something that's dear to my heart, and I'm really honored to be starting this series with you guys. So because the topic is storytelling as resistance, I want to invite you guys to close your eyes for 1 second and travel with me to Yemen, where decades ago, my mom was pregnant with me, 8 months pregnant exactly. And she was in our village, and her and my dad were coming back from the village to the capital, Sana'a, by car. But it was unpaved. And by the time they got to the capital, it was only a half an hour ride. But by the time they got there, labor had started. Now the problem was it was Eid al-Adha, which is a holiday, national holiday, Muslim holiday. And so her midwife was gone for 3 days in her own village visiting her family. And so there was no one to help my mom at the time. My dad went looking for another midwife. Everybody was in their villages. And 22 hours later, my dad finally found another midwife who managed to come in time to swaddle me and put me near the window. Now, in the distance was Jabal Nuqam, the very mountain where it said that Sam, or Shem, the son of Noah, founded a city that we now call Sana'a after the flood. It's also called the city of Sam in Yemen. This was how my parents told me, you can open your eyes now. This was how my parents told me my birth story. They not only linked it to the day I was born, but to the ancient roots that this city has, to the time, of Noah. And in a sense, I think that's how I want to start this talk. The importance of storytelling really begins with providing continuity and structure to an entire culture. Now, this birth story would be told to me and retold many, many times. Whenever we'd hear of someone pregnant, my dad or mom would mention the story. There were other parts to it that I skipped. In afternoon gatherings, at the grocery store, for example. So for Yemenis, storytelling isn't just reserved for bedtime. It's really an important component of daily conversation. And my favorite stories growing up were about the jinn. So I don't know if you all know what the jinn are, but for those of you who don't, they're supernatural beings, right? They live in parallel universe. They have personalities like us. They have parents and children and families, and my goal in life was to meet one of them. Even though I was petrified, I never did. But I did listen intensely to these stories. And my second favorite stories centered on the real life prison escape attempts of my uncles and father when they were in prison. When they were younger, they were political prisoners after the beheading of my grandfather, also for political reasons. And while these were super sad stories in some ways, they were also stories filled with action, filled with longing, and we really yearned to hear more about them. So channeling their kind of revolutionary spirit, I joined Yemen's revolution in 2011. But then something happened afterwards. In 2015, when the war started in Yemen, I really became frozen. It was the opposite of my entire life before that in terms of being politically active. And like many people in the diaspora, many Yemenis, I would say in the diaspora, or others living in the diaspora, watching a war from while you're living far away from it is extremely painful. Obviously nowhere near the pain that people experiencing the war. But when you're away, you feel a mixture of things. You feel a lot of guilt, you feel a lot of anxiety about the people that you love who are living in the midst of war. And you are bombarded with these images on an hourly, actually minute by minute basis, when we're scrolling through social media or our WhatsApp groups. And it becomes so overwhelming. And I think what ends up happening is that you have two kinds of people: those who end up speaking about the war and the injustices at length and never stop and never speak of anything else. And then you have another group that are unable to speak about it at all, Few are in the middle that can balance this. And I was amongst the second group for some time. I hid and I wanted to avoid the pain because it just became too heavy. Now, the problem is when we armor ourselves from pain, we also seal off aliveness in all other parts of our life. And we become, like I eventually learned, frozen, numb, and politically apathetic, unfortunately. And then one day, I woke up in a panic. And I turned to my husband, and I asked him immediately, what was the name? On which street was our favorite Ethiopian restaurant in Yemen? What was it called? And where was which street? Was it Shara al-Qasr or Shara Jamal? Jamal Street or al-Qasr Street? And he's like, oh, it's somewhere near the Chinese embassy. And I said, okay, but what's the name of the street? Which one is it? And I insisted, and my voice elevated and my heart was pounding. And I wasn't sure why I was getting so worked up about the restaurant. But in retrospect, I now know that I was upset because as a daughter of a historian, I understood the importance of memory, and I worried that if I had begun to forget these little details, I would forget the country that I'd left behind. So for the following weeks, I began asking myself questions like, how many spoons did Ammu Ali put in the tea? How did my late grandmother smell like? What color was our door? Was it just pure wood or was it painted? And I really tried to remember. And as I wrote down the answers, I began a process of remembering, which you'd think was easy, but it was actually quite difficult because this meant I had to work through my avoidance of suffering. And the memories, they stirred up deep feelings. And the process was both painful, but also transformative in the end. So instead of like static black and white images, my memories transformed into colorful, vibrant stories marked by nostalgia, horror, love, and longing, and fear. I remembered the dead bodies that I'd photographed, the death of a dear friend, and the imprisonment of others. And as I wrote these down for the first time, I was able to process a little bit of the grief that I ignored. But something else also came to the surface. I was flooded with ecstatic joy when I remembered how stunningly beautiful Yemen is and how rich the culture is. And it's a mixture of the Yemeni culture has Arab elements, African elements, Indian elements. Let me try and show you a few of those things that brought joy to me. I will have to share my screen, 1 second. Can you see? Yes? All right. So the first thing, hold on. The first thing I remembered were these magnificent buildings. You know, the architecture in Yemen is breathtaking, and the way they're just edged into the mountain. They're part of the mountain. You know, they're not just simply buildings all on their own. They're part of the landscape. And I find that extremely, extremely unique. And it's something that every time I see a picture of it, it just brings joy to me. The second one is this is a balcony in the old city of Sana'a. This is where our balcony. And I just remember, whenever I look at this picture, I remember the amazing view I would wake up to every morning, the sun that I desperately miss now that I'm living in Brussels, and the sounds that I would hear when I go out there. The grapes of Yemen. Now, I don't know, we were just talking about it a little while ago, Edwin and I. There are about 40 different varieties of grapes in the country, and the vineyards fill Yemen, and there are so many different grapes. And these are some, I miss the different types of grapes. I don't remember all the names. I know a few of the names, but I have them listed somewhere if anybody's interested. The clothing and the fabrics, you know, Yemen has a lot of vibrant colors that we don't necessarily associate with Yemen. And this fabric, this dress is made of a fabric called sitara. It's a traditional fabric that women used to wear. And now it's being used in a modern twist, you know, in clothes and fashion. People hang, you know, like this also, this fabric is Yemeni as well. Of course, Yemen tea, I'm not sure if you know this, it's not to be confused with Lipton tea. It looks exactly the same, but tastes very different. And then my childhood biscuits that I loved, Abu Walad. In Yemen, we love a lot of things that start with Abu Walad. We have Abu Walad, Abu Malaka, Abu Bagara, different kinds of snacks and sweets. Oh, okay. And then this is one of my favorite sweets called Bint al-Sahm, translated as daughter of the plate, literally. Those are a few, I think I forgot one here, but those are the few things that came to my mind when I started this process of remembering. Let me just close this, 1 second, okay. And now when I say I began remembering, it's not like I had forgotten, but I had chosen not to feel these memories. So not only because they were too much to bear, as I said earlier, but also because we're told too much enthusiasm about something is uncool, you know? To grieve in public is unbecoming. To cry if we're at work is, of course, unprofessional, even if you're a journalist covering something so heavy and filming, you know, or photographing dead bodies. We're not supposed to show any emotion. And that emotion, of course, just seeps in our body if we don't engage with it. But once I began to share my stories with other people, I first started, you know, sharing with a small groups, you know, with my family members, with cousins, and then with friends, smaller circle. And then it started to grow, you know, with the public, both virtual and live public. I began a process of connecting with people. And I noticed that the more I shared sincerely these stories, whether it's negative, perceived negative stories we perceive as negative or positive, as long as they're honest and sincere, and I felt an immediate connection with people, and people would contact me, and people want to share their stories, and there would be a bond would be established. And I think this is really at the heart of storytelling, right? It's this connection, this two-way interaction between storyteller and the listener, and stories can help us connect in that way with the person, but also with our own intuition. It allows us to imagine a better world. I mean, can you imagine if we didn't have stories? How would we dream, and how would we nourish our souls? So once I began reading more Yemeni stories, writing them, and sharing them with other people, I realized that this was in fact my own way of coming back home. Not only because the stories transformed me, not transform, yeah, they did transform me in many ways, but not only, and I was also living in Yemen at the moment when I was imagining, you know, these stories, but also because in Yemen, oral traditions are a very highly developed art form, and storytelling is key, of course, to that oral tradition. Storytelling happens everywhere in Yemen, in the private and public spheres. If you ride a small dabab, which is a small mini white bus, you'll hear people share folk tales about great prophets and ordinary people, and sometimes they mix historical facts with fiction. Sometimes it's personal stories. In the streets, while laborers wait for jobs, they actually share, often you could share them sharing a treasure of stories passed down to them from generation to generation. And in conferences or even work meetings, you know, it wouldn't be surprising that someone would start a meeting off with a poetry recitation, and it can be spontaneous and sometimes it's rehearsed. My father's gift to all of us on every single occasion, whether it's a birthday or an anniversary, or, you know, I had 2 children when I, you know, as a congratulations for me, is a poem. And as a young child, I really didn't want a poem. I wanted a gift. But now I finally appreciate it. And I even asked him recently if he still had them, because I lost mine, the one, and thankfully he still has all of them saved. And so I want to, you know, put them all together, because I finally came to a point where I actually appreciate them. In afternoon gatherings, especially women's gatherings, women share so many stories in these gatherings, and they're beautiful. They share their joys, their sorrows through songs, dance, and proverbs. My grandmother was a queen of proverbs. She incorporated them in almost every conversation. Anything you tell her, she will find a proverb that suits it. Now, one of the proverbs I love and I live by is for breakfast is the soul, because I love breakfast. And so for women, it's not just a fun thing, storytelling. It carries even a greater importance, I would say, because there is unfortunately a very high illiteracy rate amongst women in Yemen. So storytelling for them is an important and necessary means of self-expression, and in many ways of survival. And so these oral traditions are really the carriers of our collective histories. They're passed on from generation to generation. And as Yemenis, We are the expression and the extension of all those who came before us. And the resilience is our inheritance. And I can't stress that enough. We should be really proud of all this rich culture and all this resilience of the people before us, and that we've inherited. It's somewhere in us, and we just need to regain it, connect with it. And I think that's why it's very, very important for us to fight to keep these traditions, these recipes, these clothes, architecture, jewelry, and all art forms alive against those who want to erase us. Of course, we should have also a discussion about traditions that are not good for us, right? And how we would like to live our life. Because as Yemenis, or as any group of people, we're not a monolithic block. Everybody, we have our differences, we have our differences of opinions, we are nuanced. And that's very important. There isn't a single narrative about who it is to be Yemeni. And so I think our resistance can be now, one type of resistance is to keep our records and memories alive. Memories of war atrocities, because we need to remember those, and memories of children laughing. Resistance is also taking the time to create, to tell stories, to immerse ourselves in our joys and our sorrows. Resistance is sharing our diverse stories so that we can fight the single media narrative that I just talked about. And resistance is healing our personal and ancestral wounds so that we can be the ones to break the link in the chain. Resistance is holding on to our memories and guarding them so that they're not hijacked by all the blood. And so now, to conclude, when people ask me, how do you resist the war all the way from Brussels? I say, I remember. That's it. Thank you. I'll stop here, and then I'd love to hear if you have any questions.
Yay! Thank you so much. Can you all hear me okay? My Wi-Fi is being a little weird. Okay. Awesome. So thank you so much for that. I guess we will switch over to questions now. If anyone has questions, please go ahead and type them in the Q&A section. Just a reminder, we're not really talking about, US policy towards Yemen at the moment. So this is, a really great opportunity to talk about Yemeni culture and storytelling as resistance. So if anyone has any questions, drop them in the Q&A section. But for now, so what forms constitute storytelling, in your opinion, Atiaf?
So I think storytelling is one of these words that's like a buzzword. Everybody uses storytelling in different ways, I would say. And I think the difference between storytelling and just stories is the two-way interaction. Storytelling is telling a story. And so whether I'm a two-way interaction with at least one person, right? So with stories, I could just read them, right? Or write a story. But if I'm not interacting with somebody about the story, then it's not necessarily storytelling. They're just stories. But once I take that, let's say, I don't know, short story, and I read it to somebody, and then there's a give and take, I feed off their energy, they feed off mine. Maybe my story will change. Maybe I'll impact somebody, maybe they'll impact me. To me, that's storytelling. And it can be, orally, an oral story. It can be something you wrote and read to people. I think storytelling can also be a dance, a photograph that you engage with and you discuss with a photographer. But as long as there is some sort of interaction, that's the key to storytelling.
Thank you. I'm really excited about this question. So thank you, Aisha, for asking it. Do you have a favorite jinn story that you can share?
Ooh, that's a good question. My favorite jinn story. Okay, so my father used to tell us about this one particular nice jinni, because they're the jinnis. They can be mischievous, they can be pious, they can be all sorts of. They have temperaments, right? And so there was this one supposed jinni in the old city of Sana'a who used to love to take the slippers, the wooden slippers of one of the scholars who lived in the old city, and he would just go, the jinni would go up and down the stone stairs every morning to wake up this scholar for morning prayers, because this scholar never used to wake up for the morning prayers, according to the story. And so the jinni would, just make all these sounds with the wooden steps up and down. And eventually this person started waking up for prayers. So I found that really funny. And I remember my sisters and I, was it my cousins? I can't remember. We went to the house where this jinni was supposed to have been, and we looked for the slippers. And when we found the slippers, or someone told us they were the supposed slippers, we were so scared. We couldn't sleep that night. But at the same time, we were waiting for the slippers to move, right? But they didn't, unfortunately.
I'm sure they didn't move because you guys are so pious. You woke up for prayer. You didn't need them.
Maybe.
One of our next question is, what smell immediately makes you think of Yemen?
Ooh, what smell? Bakhur, incense. Incense immediately. We have many different kinds of incense, and I usually light some here, almost on a daily basis. But that immediately takes me back to Yemen. It takes me back to after lunch, because when we cook with a lot of onions and garlic and spices, and the kitchen and the entire apartment or house, it smells like food after we finish. And so we have to, have incense afterwards. I think that's why we have so many incense, to cover the smell of the food. And then afterwards, after we take a shower, we always put the incense everywhere, in our hair. And so my daughter here now, she does the same. So whenever I light up some incense, she's immediately like, I want, she does this with her hair. So at least that's the way I introduce Yemen to her, through these little gestures.
Thank you. Our next question is, how much have you written about your memories, the visions of you as Yemeni?
How much, can you repeat that?
Yeah, how much have you written about your memories and the visions of you as Yemeni?
So it's a good question. I used to, when I was younger, I had a diary, many diaries. And some of them, my first diary was given to me as a gift when I was 9 years old. And I think it was my refuge, because I come from a big family and I didn't have any kind of personal space, as many Yemenis know. It's the same. And the diary became that kind of personal space where I would just write everything. And so in it, I wrote, that's, I think, the first time I wrote my memories as a child. And then as I started getting older, I stopped. And the first time I went back to writing my memories, I would say, or recalling memories, right? Maybe 4 years ago. Yeah, I would say probably 4 years ago. And that's when I started this process or 3 years ago. I can't really remember exactly. I would say 3-4 years ago when I started to kind of face my memories, and begin this process of recalling and remembering and connecting again.
It's beautiful. And I love that you started so early. Next question, and I'm kind of biased towards this one, so I'll say that. I'll start with acknowledging that. So the question is, I would love to know more about women's gatherings and what kind of stories were told there.
Sure. What I have to say, when I was in Yemen, I wasn't necessarily a big fan. And now I guess it's nostalgia, or sometimes when you leave something, you realize how much you love it, right? So the women's gatherings are such a great space for self-care, because what happens is they're working all day, taking care of everyone in the household. making the lunch, doing all this other things. And then right after lunch, they drop everything, get ready, take a shower, put bakhur on, like all the incense, and put on their nice clothes and say, bye guys, I'm meeting my friends. And they all meet, family, friends. Sometimes it's like small groups of people, sometimes it's larger groups of people, and sometimes it's family, sometimes it's friends, different occasions. So it could be like someone had a baby, let's go visit her. Someone got engaged, someone there's so many different, someone's sick, let's go visit them. And then in these gatherings, the women will often talk about just all sorts of things, right? So you have women complaining about their husbands, you have women complaining about their friends, you have women remembering a funny story that just happened, women talking about sex, women talking about they're complaining about their children. Or just sharing, there's a lot of complaints. It's like it's a group therapy session. But also sharing, like, oh, did you see this? Sharing tips of where to get the best clothes, or where to go for a holiday, the nearest city. Or it depends on we also talking about politics as well. It depends on the gathering, it depends on the group. Sharing stories. Sometimes they watch movies or shows, and sometimes they get up and dance. It varies. It depends on the group you're with. Yeah, I would say that's the summary. I'm sure I've forgotten something, but.
Thank you.
Oh yeah, and someone said here, and that's actually a good point, when electricity turns off, it was the best time. Yeah, and people tell stories. That's a very good point. I think Yasmin. And that's the time when people gather and tell stories. And like with the electricity's off, and you have just like a candle. And that makes the jinn stories also even more scary, because it's just with the candlelight.
Let's see. Someone said, I think it's an act of resistance just to talk about fun things and laughter. Can you tell us a Yemeni joke?
Oh, I completely agree. I think it's radical to say, you know what, I'm gonna focus on joy. And I think because we live in such a chaotic world, so much negativity, so much is happening, to say, no, I want to focus on joy is not easy. And it's not, and I think it is radical. A Yemeni joke, there's so many, but now I'm put on the spot. I can't think of one right now.
We can circle back to it, or
I'll circle back, and I'll think of it. Yeah, we'll circle back.
We have a couple people asking, like, if you have a favorite poem or a favorite verse from a poem that you would like to recite or talk about at all.
Well, the one it's very generic, but the one that keeps playing in my mind, المقالح's line, لابد من صنعاء وإن طال السفر. صنعاء is a must, even no matter how long the journey takes. I'm maybe butchering the translation, but no matter how long the journey. And to me, that's it's very much a part of me. I do hope, I think I carry Sanaa with me, and I'm not necessarily someone who's into like patriotism, and it's not about that. I think Sanaa, even though it's my birth city, it's a city I chose to love. It's a city that I find myself calling home. And I think even if I wasn't born there, I think I would feel the same. There's something about that city that just calls to me, and I don't know, and especially the old city. And I don't know if it's just the way the architecture is, or the way how I don't know what it is about that city, but this poem kind of gives me the hope, or this verse, that I'll go back one day, and one day maybe, inshallah, hopefully my kids will get to see the city that I love so much.
That's beautiful. I love Sana'a too. It's such an amazing city. And before we get into more of the audience questions, do you mind talking more about the city itself, its architecture, the spirit? Because I think Sana'a is something very distinct to Yemen.
Mm-hmm. And now, like, Sana'a, I guess, has also different neighborhoods. And I think if you live in it depends on where you live, right? And the place that has, I think that is the most breathtaking is for me, I'm biased, is the old city of Sana'a. And I am biased on this, so I'm sure there are other beautiful places too. And I think part of it is just how ancient it is. You know, it's the houses are 2,500 years old, and it's one of the most continuously inhabited cities. So the houses are, if not older, they're passed down from generation to generation. They've never, they've always been inhabited. And I find that so beautiful, so much richness, from generation to generation. And you feel that presence, you feel those traditions. Just by going in, there is some sort of energy in that place. The alleyways, they're just so narrow. Many places you have to go to by walking. You can't take a car inside, which is also nice. My favorite thing is the collective gardens in Mikshama, and that's where the neighborhood, residents, they garden in a collective garden, and some of them sell some of these produce to make money, but they use it collectively. And sometimes there's often next to the mosques, you also have this well for people because we have a great deal of water shortage. So that's where people go and collect water for free instead of buying water tanks and things like that. And the alleyways, they're just so interesting because they're so small, they're so narrow, and you can really get lost. And so I remember I used to get lost a lot, and because everything looks the same almost, and it took me a while to get used to the different streets, and then nothing has names. Well, now they do, but for a while the small alleyways didn't have really names, and so you would get lost, and Google Maps won't help you there. And so you really need kind of like to get to know the place. But at the same time, everybody is outside. It's easily, you can just ask somebody, hey, can I, how can I get here? How can I get there? Then you have the souk, right? So the souk has everything, the market. And you find like blacksmiths and carpenters and using the streets outside as their place of work. So it's a very interactive space. You see people at work. They're not necessarily closed off. And that you have these little restaurants, little potato stands, French fry stands. What else? You have people making oil using a camel to kind of grind. It's very vibrant, and if you go there at 5 a.m., you'll see people already at work. You have little cafes, or the oldest coffee place there. You have a very good tea place as well. It's a great place.
Thank you so much. That was so visual. Like I could visualize everything without having been there. So thank you so much for that. Someone asked sort of being so far away from Yemen, how do you bring your mind and soul back to Yemen, and how do you stay in touch when you're, in Brussels?
Thank you. I think that's a very good question. Cooking. I would say food is another way. Just like bukhur, when I smell incense, I'm immediately transported. With certain meals, as soon that one bite, it just takes me back immediately. I eat and I'm transported back to Yemen. And so I try and make Yemen. It takes a long time, Yemeni food. So I have 2 kids. One is 5 months old. don't really have the time in lockdown as well to just, sit and cook. I would love to, but that's when I do, that's one way of connecting to the place and also bringing Yemen to my family here, to my kids. Listening to Yemeni music, dancing by myself. I dance here all the time. I dance, Sanani, and with Sanani dance, it's usually you need someone else. It's not a solo dance, and you're supposed to hold someone's hand, and 3 people at least. But I pretend I have someone, and I dance by myself. Sometimes I use the mirror, so that works. What else? I on YouTube I watch Yemeni shows. I watch Yemeni shows. For example, when I was with my second child, I was got really sick the first trimester when I was pregnant, and I was in bed for like a month, and all I did was watch this Yemeni show on YouTube every day. I was super emotional, and I'm crying and watching and crying. But it was really nice because I just felt connected, I guess, to the place. What else do I do that keeps me connected? I guess watching shows, music, art in general. I think there's a lot of really amazing people doing amazing things, Yemeni artists, filmmakers, photographers, and they're bringing Yemen to me here, through their photographs and movies and documentaries, and Instagram has a bunch of these artists that I now follow, and it's really exciting to see that, and it connects. I think it connects Yemen to people abroad, and it also makes individual connections with these people,
Yeah, I definitely agree. And when you're talking about all these amazing artists who are doing such great work, that's what the series hopes to highlight, right? We hope to bring a lot of these Yemeni voices and really center them. But one thing that you touched on and have touched on throughout your talk that I'm really interested in, especially as part of the diaspora, how do you pass on your Yemeni culture to your children? And how do you, I think, and there's a specific question from the audience, what stories do you like to share with your kids about Yemeni resilience?
So how do I share? Yeah, other than what I've mentioned, clothes. So for example, my daughter is 5 years old now, and she has, I would say, 5 Yemeni dresses that she loves to wear. And she wore it this October, one of the dresses. She wears them a lot to school. And then she came back and told me, for example, one time that one of the kids told her that it wasn't Halloween and she shouldn't, why is she dressed like it as though it's Halloween? And so I asked her, oh, what did you say? How did you respond? She said, doesn't matter what he said. I love this dress. And I thought, wow, I think my job is done. I hope she holds on to this. It was a proud mama moment, I have to say. But that makes me happy. And she calls them, the Yemeni dresses. So for her, that's the way she connects with Yemen. She loves these dresses, and that's Yemen to her. We have, it's not here, in the living room, a big kind of blown up poster of old city of Sana'a. And I showed her, her brother is only 5 months. I already showed him, but he's still too young. But that where we lived in the old city, because that's the photo. So we point to the picture. We lived in this house. And so once actually she saw, we went to a Lebanese restaurant, and she saw a picture of, I think it was Baalbek or something, an old building. And she pointed, she was, I think, 2.5 or 3. And she pointed and she said, Mama, Yemen. I said, no, that's not Yemen. It looks similar, but it was starting. She sees buildings that look similar, that's Yemen. Now she's 5, she sees the patterns and the colors, and she links them with Yemen. So that's one way I try and link Yemen. In terms of stories, I noticed it's really hard. We don't have, unfortunately, Yemeni stories for children, and that's something that actually a group of us are working on, because we want to read stories to our children about Yemen, right? And they don't really exist. The stories in Yemen are often very general stories, are not about Yemen, and they're often regional books in Arabic, but they're not Yemen focused. And for the people in Yemen, they may not see it, the need for it, because they are living in Yemen. But for my kids, I want books that, you know, introduce the country, that help them connect with the country. And so I've had to kind of make them up. And so for my daughter's 4th birthday, I think what it was, or 3rd, I can't remember. I actually wrote her a story called Namirat Lilia. Lilia is her name. Lilia's tiger. Tiger was her favorite animal at the time. And this tiger goes from place to place in different landmarks in the country. And the tiger, you know, she loses the tiger at first, and then eventually she finds the tiger by going to all these different landmarks. And, you know, I made her a little book, and hopefully a version of this will actually become a real book soon, inshallah. But it's stories that I've had to come up with simply because we, unfortunately don't have. And I think that's one area that can be strengthened by us Yemenis, is working on children's books.
Well, I will be purchasing that book. So why do you think that storytelling is so important, especially given Yemen's current context?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, you know, it's hard because there's a humanitarian crisis, right? And then we say, oh, why would we talk about storytelling? It's not important. But I think actually storytelling is really vital for our well-being, and because it helps us do a number of things. One, it helps us process grief in a way other mediums can't, I think. And because we are often told to shield ourselves from emotions, stories help us actually get in touch with those emotions, right? So I think that's one really important reason why we need stories. And for people, for example, in Yemen, some of them, and I've heard this more than once, they'd say, you know, I'm not afraid of death anymore. What I'm afraid about is how I'm going to live tomorrow. And I think for people that say this, stories and maybe art in general helps them transcend the here and now, and maybe in some way helps give them hope and joy for that moment. You know, it gives them reprieve from the ever-present sorrows. And so, and we notice that we see this, you know, when you have a funny video, or the number of likes or shares are so much more than other kind of videos, because people need joy. People need joy to survive. And the other reason we need stories is that it helps us understand who we are, you know, as a society, helps us understand who we are as individuals, and it helps build empathy, which I think in today's world is really, really necessary. Only through story can you understand a different person's perspective. And so I think in that sense, it's vital. And I think it helps kind of bring together the collective consciousness of all of us in micro doses that we can handle.
Yeah, I definitely agree with all of that. And really the perfect event to start the series. So before we wrap up, one final question. Going forward, what Yemeni stories do you want to see?
I want to see more stories by Yemenis, and when I say by Yemenis, not just Yemenis as a monolithic block. We're very different, right? We have different backgrounds, different opinions, different. We come from different places in the country, and all these voices are important. Every single voice is important, no matter how old you are. Your story matters, and I would love to hear everyone's story, and that's what makes a Yemeni story, right? It's all these different stories. It's not just one group of people, and I find it hopeful when I see things on Instagram, for example, of how people in a way share their own stories there, right? But I would love to hear more stories also, not just about us as victims, but us with agency, right? Because we do have agency, and we have so many stories that show how resilient and how incredibly amazing and vibrant our culture is. That those stories matter too, and I would love to hear or see more of these stories. And I wish there would be more translation of Arabic stories into English so that other people can read them, because in other Arab countries you have a lot of the work being translated from Arabic to English, but when it comes to Yemeni works, it's not so much translation, and I think I wish there was more.
Thank you so much. And thank you everyone so much for tuning in today, whether if you're on YouTube or Zoom. We love the engagement and thoughtfulness. There were so many great comments about people's experience in Sana'a in the chat. And thank you so much to Atiaf Al-Wazir for being here and taking time out of your day and helping us navigate the time difference between the US and Brussels. And I think I speak for all of us when I say she left us with a lot to think about. Our next event will be on the 17th, December 17th at 7 p.m. Eastern Time with Alia Ali. We hope to see you all there. And make sure to subscribe to Code Pink's YouTube channel. So if you miss any of our Beyond the War events, they will be up there. You can even share this event with all of your friends, so everyone can listen to Atiaf talk about Yemeni storytelling and how vital it is. So thank you everyone for tuning in. Thank you Atiaf for being here. Thank you Arwa for navigating this amazing conversation. And thank you to Yemen Relief and Reconstruction Foundation. Everyone have a beautiful